Welcome back to the final stretch of KansasFest 2021. We're going to keep moving right along with our next presentation, How I Accidentally Archived Hundreds of Apple II source code floppies. Say that 5 times fast. By Savetz. So take it away, Kay.
Hello, KansasFest. This is the voice of Savetz, and this is my presentation, How I Accidentally Archived Hundreds of Apple II Source Code Floppies, a completely true story. This year, I hunted for a copy of a single magazine article that led me to being handed a massive stack of Apple II source code floppies, all in the fourth language. How did that happen? What the heck is fourth anyway? And did I ever find the article? Stay tuned to find out. So first of all, Pixar didn't happen. Here is the massive stack of Apple II source code floppies. A somewhat impressive picture. Here is a more impressive picture, all in a pile. So first of all, who am I? I am Savetz. Here is my picture. I am one of the hosts of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast, where I have done more than 400 interviews of people who did things with Atari 8-bit computers. And before you say, oh, it's an Atari guy, what are you doing here talking at an Apple conference? Well, a lot of the interviews that I do have a lot of overlap. A lot of people who did things for Atari computers also did things for Apple II. So here is a very incomplete list of people who I have interviewed who have a lot of relevance to the Apple II. Brad Stewart and Bruce Artwick and Mark Pilarski and Rodney Zacks and Bob Frankston. These are some of the people I've interviewed over the years. So there you go. So while I'm doing these interviews, sometimes I go down rabbit holes and I try to find everybody I can who knows something about a pretty obscure topic. And in 2020, I started researching the Capitol Children's Museum. The Capitol Children's Museum was a museum in Washington, D.C., and it had one of the nation's first public computer labs where people could go in there and sit in a lab full of computers. And Atari had done a lot of promotion about this, about how they had donated 30 Atari computers to this lab and how they were being used in the museum. And it turns out in my research that also, Apple later, a few years later, donated more than 100 Apple IIs to the same museum. So I have ended up interviewing the person who ran the museum at the time and the person who ran the computer lab. And so I was looking for this article, and the article that I started to look for early on was called A Day at the Capitol Children's Museum. And I found an abstract of it mentioned in ERIC, which is a database of articles about education. And this article was written by a woman named Melanie Graves, and it was published in a magazine called Classroom Computer News. And I was looking for volume 3, number 1. So I wanted to see this article, and apparently it had some pictures of the Capitol Children's Museum in there, and I could not find this article. Here's some pictures I did find later of the museum. I could not find this article. I went, of course, checked Internet Archive, and I checked Google. I tried to get a hold of the author, Melanie Graves. I went to my local library and requested an interlibrary loan. I knew I could say, exactly what issue of what magazine it was in. Shouldn't be too hard for them to find it, and they were unable to. The wonderful librarians at my library said they couldn't find it in their collections, and it says we have it in WorldCat, but we couldn't find it. And also, there was 2 publications with that same name, and also that magazine got sold to another company. And it was true. The magazine did get sold to another company, which later got sold to another company, which later got sold to another company. So first thing I did was I tried to get a hold of the author, see if she had a copy of the article, and I could not reach her. And then I tried to get a hold of the company that bought the company that bought the company to see if they had any archives that they could get me this article, and they did not. They were not responsive. But eventually, I did find the person who published the original classroom computer news. And his name is Lloyd Prentice, and he lives in Massachusetts. And he said that he probably had that article in his archives and he would find it for me. And he dug around and he did not have it. He did not have that issue after all. But he did have several other early issues. I offered to scan them if he would loan or give them to me. I said I would scan them, I would put them on Internet Archive, and he did just that. He sent me several of the issues. I scanned them all, and they are now available at the Internet Archive. And it's a really good resource for learning about the use of microcomputers in the classrooms in the early 80s. But then I learned that Lloyd Prentice also was the president of a company called Prentice Associates Incorporated. And PAI was a company that made software, a lot of it for the Apple II, and he made software for other companies. He was contracted by companies like Reader's Digest, Reinhardt and Winston, and Houghton Mifflin and Scholastic. And his company was contracted to make educational software, which was then marketed and sold by these other companies. Here's a few of them that have been preserved by our friend 4AM, which are now available at the Internet Archive. So I guess I had earned Mr. Prentice's trust by scanning and archiving his computer magazine. So he sent me these stacks of floppy disks. And I had told him, I said, look, I've done projects like this before. Floppy disks, sometimes they're super easy to read and sometimes they're not. And this is a lot of stuff. And he had told me that some of this was for the Apple II and some of this was for the IBM PC and maybe for other platforms. So I said, this is going to take a year. You got to give me a year to get all this stuff archived. And he said, fine. And he sent me these stacks and stacks of floppy disks. So I will cut to the chase and tell you that this project that I had honestly expected to take me a year took a week. I think it took me 8 days. And here's why it took such a short amount of time. It was the applesauce floppy disk controller. This is an amazing machine. You hook it up to a standard Apple II disk drive. You put disks in there. You hook that to your Macintosh, and it just reads those disks, gets the data off, and is 100%. You can be sure that you got all the data. It was incredible. I have used other tools. I have used the SuperCard Pro. I have used the CryoFlux. I've used the FC5025, and I looked at them all recently for this and other projects, and the FC5025 didn't work because the drivers haven't been updated for the newer version of macOS. I've always found the CryoFlux fussy to use. The SuperCard Pro I don't think works with Apple disks. I don't know but man, why would I use any of those when I have an applesauce? It is magic. So I started reading these disks, and although the applesauce said that they were perfectly readable, I couldn't get any of the data off the disks. I couldn't boot them. I couldn't verify that the source code was there, and I was kind of confused. And then I learned that the data on all of these disks was written in a language called Forth. And Forth uses a proprietary disk structure that's not the standard Apple II disk structure, so I couldn't read them. So what did I do? I talked to John Morris. John Morris is the man who created the applesauce floppy disk controller. And he created some custom software to extract Forth data from the Apple II disks. He created a Forth bulk data extraction tool, and all of a sudden we went from disks that I really couldn't understand what was on them to source code in the Forth language. Yay, it worked. And I could, just in the matter of moments, extract all the data from all these disks. Now, what is Forth, you may ask? And I sort of have an answer. Forth is so when you think of commercial software that was released for say the Apple II or the Atari 800, you probably think assembly language. You might think BASIC. There's a few other languages. You probably don't think Forth, but it turns out a surprising amount of commercial software was written in the Forth language. It was a high level language, a lot easier to program than assembly language. It was modular. It had some cross-platform compatibility, so that you could code something on one system and have it later be ported to another. It was a convenient language that was fast to program in. So in short, Forth is a procedural, stack-based language and interactive environment that people started using in the very early 1970s. It combines a compiler with an integrated command shell, and the user can interact via subroutines that are called words. And those subroutines can be stored in sections called blocks, and the blocks are conveniently exactly one screenful. So that's convenient, I guess. I found a book about the Forth language written by a person called Leo Brody, Starting Forth, Introduction to the Forth Language. And he said, Forth is a very unusual language. It violates many cardinal rules of programming. My first reaction to Forth was extremely skeptical, but as I tried to develop complicated applications, I began to see its beauty and power. But as I said, that data is stored in an unusual way. The data is stored sequentially per track. There's no tokenization. There's no disk catalog sector. There's no boot sector. It's just Forth just slams raw data in source format onto the disks. And that's why I've also found that on Commodore disks and Apple II disks. That's just how it typically works. There are many various implementations of Forth, but they tend to all do that the same way. So I spent a week down in the workshop reading disks, feeding the beast, disk after disk. Most of them read just fine. A few of them ended up being PC disks, which I set aside and eventually read with the CryoFlux, exporting them, and then they all ended up on GitHub. And if you go to my GitHub page, github.com/Savetz, you can read what I found. There we ended up, hundreds of disks, and I sorted them as best I could. There was experiments with machine learning. There was experiments with graphics. There were the source code for several commercial programs, like science programs to teach genetics and photosynthesis and respiration. There was some sort of software for accessing a video cam, some sort of camera that you could attach to your Apple II, some character set editors and things. Quite a bit. I didn't put all of it up. Frankly, some of it I could not figure out what it was. I didn't know how to categorize it, so it's still sitting here on my hard drive. And if any of you really wanted to dig in and try to figure out and sort what this other stuff is, you're welcome to. And I guess that's not all, because after I finished all that, Mr. Prentice sent me another box of discs. I haven't even looked at this one. I opened it up, I took a picture for you, and that is all. So there's a lot more discs here to be dealt with. So that is the story of how I stumbled into saving hundreds of Apple II source code disks, with many more to do. Which just leaves us with one last question. Did I ever find the article I wanted? A Day at the Capitol Children's Museum. I did. Here it is. How did I find the article? Well, it was on my hard drive the whole time. Apparently, I got it via interlibrary loan in 2018. As part of a different project, I had requested a bunch of Atari-related articles that were listed in ERIC, and I filed them away and didn't know that I had it until I discovered this email from my librarian, 2018, saying, here's the article you requested, and I had downloaded it and put it there, and there it is. This entire endeavor was a fool's errand. I am Savetz. You can find me on Twitter at Savetz, and apparently I am an idiot. Thanks for watching.
Aw, it happens. It happens.
Hey, gang. Somebody asked if I had, on the Discord, if I had tried to compile this stuff and make it, compile and run it. No, that's your job. My job was to get it and to get it onto GitHub. I'm done. I don't want to know anything more about forks than that. So